The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, and Olivia Bradford's head nearly collided with the wooden frame as dust billowed through the window in thick, choking clouds that made her eyes water and her throat burn. She pressed a handkerchief to her face, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered outside at what was supposed to be her new beginning. The driver's gruff voice carried through the September afternoon air of 1878, announcing their arrival in Beaver, Utah, but something felt immediately and terribly wrong. The buildings surrounding her were weathered and sparse, and the main street little more than packed dirt with a few establishments that looked like they might collapse in a strong wind. This could not possibly be Silver Creek, the prosperous mining town where her intended husband, a banker named Charles Whitmore, had promised comfort and stability. "Miss, this is your stop," the driver called down, already hauling her trunk from the back of the coach. His weathered face showed no patience for questions, only the hard-won indifference of a man who had seen too many hopeful souls come west with dreams that rarely matched reality. Olivia stepped down carefully, her traveling dress immediately gathering dust at the hem despite her best efforts to keep it lifted. She clutched the letters in her reticule, the ones that had promised her a new life far from Boston, and the scandal that had driven her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement in the first place. Her father's gambling debts, her mother's death, and the unwanted advances of her father's creditor had made staying impossible. At 22 years old, she had thought herself brave for making this journey alone, but now fear crept up her spine like ice water. "Excuse me," she called to the driver as he prepared to leave. "Are you certain this is Silver Creek? I was told it was a mining town with a bank, a hotel, several stores." The driver squinted at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. "This here is Beaver, miss. Been Beaver for near about 20 years. Ain't never heard it called nothing else. Now I got a schedule to keep." Before she could protest further, before she could explain the terrible mistake, the stagecoach rattled away in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone on the street with her trunk at her feet and panic rising in her chest like floodwater. The few people visible on the street stopped their activities to stare at her with open curiosity. A woman in a faded calico dress whispered to her companion. Two men outside what appeared to be a saloon nudged each other and pointed. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cool autumn air. She spotted a building with a sign that read General Store and decided that would be her first destination for help. Leaving her trunk where it sat, she walked with as much dignity as she could muster across the dusty street, lifting her skirts to avoid the worst of the dirt. The store's interior was dim and smelled of tobacco, leather, and something sweet she could not identify. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" His tone was polite but cautious, as if strange women arrived on the afternoon stage regularly and usually meant trouble. "I need to send a telegram immediately," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There has been a terrible mistake. I was supposed to be delivered to Silver Creek, not Beaver. Is there a telegraph office?" The storekeeper's expression shifted to something resembling sympathy mixed with resignation. "We had a telegraph office once, but it closed down about 3 months back when the operator moved to Salt Lake City. Nearest working telegraph is in Milford, about 30 miles north. Stage runs there once a week, and you just missed it." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. 7 days. She would have to wait 7 days in a strange town with no money, no accommodation, and no way to contact Charles Whitmore to explain why she had not arrived. Worse, he would likely assume she had changed her mind or met with some disaster. The carefully constructed plan she had built in her mind crumbled like dry clay. "Is there a hotel?" she managed to ask, though she knew the answer would not be promising given the size of the town. "Not exactly a hotel, miss. Old Widow Henderson sometimes takes in boarders, but she is particular about who she lets stay. There is a boarding house on the edge of town, but it is mostly for miners passing through, and I would not recommend a lady like yourself going there alone." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Your best bet might be to talk to Reverend Mills. He and his wife might know someone willing to help." Olivia thanked him and stepped back outside, her mind racing through rapidly diminishing options. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the mountains in the distance, and she realized with growing dread that she might be spending the night on a bench or in a barn if she could not find proper accommodation. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety and humiliation. She was standing on the boardwalk trying to gather her courage to approach strangers for charity when she heard boots on the wooden planks behind her. She turned to find herself facing a man who made her breath catch in her throat for reasons she could not immediately name. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a worn work shirt. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, with strong features that might have been carved from the same rock as the surrounding mountains. Dark hair fell slightly too long beneath a battered hat, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of green that seemed to see right through her careful composure. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, and there was something in the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and perhaps a touch of stubbornness. "You are the lady from the stage," he said, and it was not a question. His voice was deep and rough around the edges like gravel underfoot. "Saw you standing here looking lost. Name is Dalton Jenkins. I work cattle and horses mostly, have a small ranch outside town." "Olivia Bradford," she replied automatically, then felt foolish for giving her name so readily to a stranger. But what choice did she have? She needed help, and this man seemed direct in a way that was almost refreshing after months of Charles Whitmore's flowery letters that she was beginning to suspect had been more fiction than fact. "Miss Bradford, this is going to sound forward, but I could not help overhearing your conversation with Tucker in the store just now. Sound carries in these old buildings. You're in a difficult situation, seems like." Dalton removed his hat and held it in his hands, a gesture that seemed both respectful and somehow uncomfortable, as if he was unused to making such efforts. "I might be able to help, but I need to know what your plans are. You waiting for someone? Running from something?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In Boston, people had danced around uncomfortable topics with careful euphemisms and polite lies. Out here, apparently, survival demanded honesty, or at least the appearance of it. "I am a mail-order bride," she said, lifting her chin despite the shame that tried to creep into her voice. "Or I was supposed to be. I was meant to arrive in Silver Creek to marry a man named Charles Whitmore. The stage driver made a mistake, or perhaps I boarded the wrong coach. I do not know. But I am in the wrong town with no money and no way to contact my intended for at least 7 days." Dalton's expression did not change, but something flickered in those green eyes. Something she could not quite read. "Silver Creek is about 60 miles east of here, up in the mountains. Mining town, like you said. I know it some. They have had problems lately with the mines flooding, businesses closing, not the prosperous place it might have been a year ago." This information sent a new wave of anxiety through Olivia's chest. Had Charles Whitmore known about these problems when he placed his advertisement? Had he lied about his circumstances? Or had fortune simply turned against him after their correspondence began? "Regardless of the town's current state, I gave my word I would come," Olivia said firmly. "I intend to honor that commitment if possible, but first I need to survive the next week, and I find myself at the mercy of strangers' kindness." Dalton studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her face down to her impractical traveling dress and back up again. She fought the urge to fidget under that assessment, to make excuses for her obvious unsuitability to this harsh landscape. "Here is the situation as I see it," Dalton said finally, his voice low enough that passers-by could not easily overhear. "This town is small and people talk. You show up alone, clearly quality folk from back east, and you start asking for help, tongues are going to wag. By tomorrow morning, you will have a reputation, deserved or not. Widow Henderson would not take you in even if you had money to pay her, because she would worry about what people might say. The boarding house I mentioned is no place for a respectable woman, and that leaves precious few options." "Then what do you suggest?" Olivia asked, trying not to let desperation sharpen her tone. "My ranch is about 3 miles outside town. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Sarah Potter, who is about 60 years old and respectable as they come. She could use help with the cooking and mending, and there is a spare room. You could stay there, work for your keep, And when the stage runs again next week, I will personally take you to Milford so you can send your telegram and sort out this mess." He paused, then added, "I know how it sounds, a stranger offering help, but this town has me, Miss Bradford. I was born here, and my family is buried in the cemetery on the hill. People know me, and they will know I'm trying to help you proper-like, not take advantage. This town has me." The word struck her as both a statement of fact and something deeper, a kind of belonging she had never felt even in the city where she was born. Olivia weighed her options, which were few and all risky in their own ways. She could try to find the Reverend Mills and beg for charity, but that would make her an object of pity. She could attempt the boarding house and risk her safety and reputation. Or she could trust this cowboy with the steady green eyes and the calloused hands who spoke plainly and seemed to have nothing to gain from helping her. "Why would you help me?" she asked directly, needing to understand his motivation. "You do not know me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." A ghost of a smile touched the corners of Dalton's mouth, the first hint of humor she had seen from him. "Could say the same about your banker in Silver Creek, could not we? At least this way you will have a week to figure out if you truly want to marry a man you have never met in a town that might be falling apart. And to answer your question, I am helping because my mother raised me to believe that when you can do something decent for someone, you do it. The world is hard enough without people making it harder for each other." The simplicity and sincerity of that statement made Olivia's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had spent so many months surrounded by people who only helped when they expected something in return, who measured every kindness against what advantage it might bring them. This rough cowboy in his dusty clothes offering help because it was the right thing to do felt like water in a desert. "All right," she said, making the decision before fear could stop her. "I accept your offer, Mr. Jenkins, with gratitude. I will work hard to earn my keep, and I will try not to be too much of a burden on your household." "Call me Dalton," he said, settling his hat back on his head, "and you will not be a burden. Sarah will probably be thrilled to have another woman around to talk to. She complains I'm not much for conversation, which I suppose is true enough. Let me get your trunk, and we will head out before it gets dark. The road is not bad, but it is better traveled in daylight." He walked with her back to where her trunk still sat, and she marveled at how easily he lifted it, as if it weighed nothing at all. He carried it to where a horse and wagon waited outside what appeared to be a feed store. The horse was a sturdy bay with kind eyes, and the wagon, while worn, looked well maintained. Dalton secured her trunk in the back, then helped her up onto the seat with a hand that was warm and rough with work. She felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the brief contact, which she immediately dismissed as nerves and exhaustion from the long journey. As they rolled out of Beaver, heading west toward the mountains that dominated the horizon, Olivia studied the landscape with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The land was so different from anything she had known in Boston. Wide open spaces stretched in every direction, painted in shades of sage green and dusty brown, broken by occasional outcroppings of red rock. The sky seemed impossibly large, an endless expanse of blue that made her feel simultaneously free and terrifyingly small. In the distance, mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks touched with the gold of the setting sun. "It is beautiful," she said softly, surprised by the truth of it. She had expected to hate the West, to find it crude and ugly compared to the civilized streets of home. But there was something raw and honest about this place that appealed to a part of herself she had not known existed. "It grows on you," Dalton said, his eyes on the road ahead. "When I was younger, I thought I wanted to leave, see the big cities, experience something different. Spent 6 months in Denver once, working in a stockyard. Made decent money, met interesting people. But in the end, I came back. This place gets in your blood, I suppose. Or maybe I just did not fit anywhere else." There was something wistful in his tone that made Olivia look at him more closely. She saw the faint lines around his eyes, marks of a life spent outdoors in harsh conditions. She saw the way he held the reins with easy confidence, his body moving with the wagon's rhythm, as if he and the horse and the land were all part of the same thing. And she saw, too, a certain loneliness in the set of his shoulders, a solitude that went deeper than just living out on a ranch with only a housekeeper for company. "Why have you never married?" she asked, then immediately regretted the intrusive question. "Forgive me, that was too personal. I have no right to ask such things," but Dalton did not seem offended. Dalton did not. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Came close once," he said finally. "Girl named Martha from over in Milford. We courted for about a year, and I thought we would make a life together. But when it came down to it, she did not want to live on a ranch. Wanted a house in town, wanted me to give up working with cattle and horses, wanted me to become something I was not. I could not do it, and she could not accept who I was, so we parted ways. She married a shopkeeper about 2 years ago, and from what I hear, she's happy enough." "And you?" Olivia asked gently. "Are you happy enough?" Dalton glanced at her, and for a moment their eyes met with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have my land, my animals, my work. It is a good life by most measures. But is it enough? I suppose that depends on the day you ask me." The honesty of that admission touched something deep in Olivia's chest. She understood that feeling all too well. The sense of having a life that looked acceptable from the outside while feeling incomplete in ways that were hard to name. Before her father's debts had destroyed everything, she had been considered a success by Boston society standards. She had been pretty, accomplished, well-mannered, the sort of daughter who reflected well on her family. But she had also been desperately lonely, surrounded by people who valued her for what she represented rather than who she actually was. "I understand," she said simply, and somehow knew he would realize she truly did. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking gently and the horses' hooves maintaining a steady rhythm. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost unreal in their vividness. Olivia had never seen a sunset like this, unmarred by buildings or factory smoke, stretching across the entire western horizon like a gift from heaven itself. "There," Dalton said, pointing ahead to where a cluster of buildings came into view. "That is home." The ranch was modest but well kept, consisting of a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings and corrals where Olivia could see horses moving in the fading light. The house itself was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth inside. As they pulled up, the front door opened, and a sturdy woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression stepped out onto the porch. She wore a simple dress covered by an apron, and she held a wooden spoon in one hand like a weapon. "Dalton Jenkins, you are late for supper, and you better have a good explanation for making me hold everything," she called out, then stopped mid-sentence as she caught sight of Olivia. Her eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. And who might this be? Dalton jumped down from the wagon and moved to help Olivia descend. His hands on her waist were steady and sure, and she felt that strange flutter again as her feet touched the ground. She smoothed her skirts and tried to look respectable, despite knowing she must be covered in dust from the journey. "Sarah, this is Miss Olivia Bradford. She had some trouble in town, got dropped off in the wrong place by the stage. She needs a place to stay until next week when she can sort out her situation. I told her she could work for her keep and stay in the spare room if that sits well with you." Sarah Potter came down the porch steps, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Olivia's appearance, with the thoroughness of a general inspecting troops. Olivia stood still under that scrutiny, lifting her chin and meeting the older woman's gaze directly. She had nothing to hide and no reason to feel ashamed, whatever her circumstances might look like to an outsider. "Wrong town, you say?" Sarah asked, her voice skeptical but not unkind. "That is quite a mistake." "Yes, madam," Olivia said respectfully. "I was meant for Silver Creek, but the stage brought me to Beaver instead. Mr. Jenkins Dalton was kind enough to offer assistance when I found myself stranded with no accommodations and no means to contact my intended." "Your intended," Sarah repeated, latching onto that word. "So you are one of those mail-order brides. Well, at least you are honest about it. Come inside, girl. You look like you are about to fall over from exhaustion. and I will not have it said that I turned away someone in need, even if the whole situation is irregular as all get out. The warmth in Sarah's voice, despite her gruff words, made Olivia's eyes sting with sudden tears. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to break down now after holding herself together through the entire nightmarish afternoon. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and bright woven rugs on the wooden floors. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace providing heat and a black iron stove for cooking. The smell of stew and fresh bread filled the air, making Olivia's stomach growl embarrassingly. "Sit," Sarah commanded, pointing to a chair at the long wooden table. "You too, Dalton. Supper has been ready for an hour, and I will not let good food go cold while we stand around talking." As they ate, Sarah and Dalton maintained an easy conversation about ranch matters and town gossip that allowed Olivia to simply listen and recover her composure. The stew was delicious, rich with beef and vegetables, and the bread was the best she had tasted since leaving Boston. She ate carefully, trying not to reveal how hungry she truly was, but Sarah noticed anyway, and ladled a second helping into her bowl without being asked. "So tell me about this banker in Silver Creek," Sarah said eventually, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "What kind of man arranges for a bride to come all this way and does not even ensure she arrives safely?" It was a fair question, and one Olivia had been asking herself. "Our correspondence was always proper," she said slowly, trying to organize her thoughts. His letters spoke of his position at the bank, his standing in the community, his desire for a refined wife who could help him establish a proper household. I answered his advertisement because my circumstances in Boston had become untenable. My father passed away leaving significant debts, and the man who held those debts made it clear he expected certain considerations in exchange for lenience. Olivia saw Dalton's hands tighten on his spoon at that delicate phrasing, saw his jaw clench with anger at what she had implied without stating directly. Sarah reached across the table and patted Olivia's hand, a gesture of solidarity between women who understood the particular vulnerabilities of their sex. "You did what you had to do," Sarah said firmly. "No shame in that, but I wonder if this Charles Whitmore is all he claimed to be in those letters. Men can paint a pretty picture with words, but reality often looks different." "I have been wondering the same thing," Olivia admitted. "The storekeeper in Beaver mentioned that Silver Creek has been having difficulties, that the mines are flooding and businesses closing. Charles never mentioned any such problems in his letters. Either he did not know, which seems unlikely for a banker, or he chose not to tell me." "Could be he was worried you would not come if you knew the truth," Dalton said quietly. "Or could be things changed fast and he had not had time to update you. Hard to say without more information." "Either way, I gave my word," Olivia said, though even to her own ears, the statement sounded less certain than it had that afternoon. "I agreed to come west and marry him. Should I not honor that commitment?" "Honor is important," Sarah agreed, "but so is common sense. If you get to Silver Creek and find the situation is not what was promised, you have no obligation to tie yourself to a liar. You hear me, girl? Marriage is hard enough when you know and love the person. Marrying a stranger based on false pretenses is just asking for misery." The wisdom in those words settled over Olivia like a heavy blanket. She had been so focused on escaping Boston, on fulfilling her agreement, that she had not truly considered what she would do if Charles Whitmore turned out to be dramatically different from his letters. Would she go through with the marriage anyway? Did she have any choice, given that she had no money and nowhere else to go? As if reading her thoughts, Dalton spoke up. "You have a week here before the stage runs to Milford. Maybe use that time to think hard about what you want, not just what you think you have to do. And if you get to Silver Creek and find it is not right, well, Beaver might be small, but there are decent people here. Options exist even if they are not the ones you planned on." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. She could stay if she needed to. This rough country might offer her a different kind of life than the one she had imagined, but it would be a life nonetheless. The possibility both terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. After supper, Sarah showed Olivia upstairs to the spare room, which was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a simple wooden dresser. A window looked out over the darkening landscape toward the mountains. "I will bring you some water for washing," Sarah said. "And I have a nightgown that might fit you, though it will be plain compared to what you're used to, I expect. We rise early here, around 5 in the morning. Breakfast is at 6, and then there are chores to be done. I will not work you like a servant, but everyone on this ranch pulls their weight." "I appreciate that," Olivia said sincerely. "I want to earn my keep, not be a burden." Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded, with what might have been approval. "You might just do all right out here, Miss Bradford. You have more steel in your spine than I first thought. Get some rest. Tomorrow will come early, and it will come hard if you're not prepared for it." Alone in the small room, Olivia changed into the borrowed nightgown and washed the dust from her face and hands. Her trunk contained her entire life, everything she had been able to keep after her father's debts were settled. Fine dresses that would be impractical in this country, books that Charles had said he would enjoy having in his home, a few pieces of jewelry that had been her mother's and which she had managed to hide from the creditors. Looking at these belongings now, they seemed to belong to a different person. Someone who had existed in a different world that already felt distant and unreal. She lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses nickered in the corrals. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. The wind whispered around the corners of the house with a sound like distant voices, and underneath it all, she heard the low murmur of Dalton and Sarah talking downstairs, though she could not make out the words. Sleep should have come easily after the exhausting day, but instead Olivia found her mind racing with questions and worries. What would Charles Whitmore think when she did not arrive? Would he assume something terrible had happened to her? Would he even care? Or had she been just a convenient solution to his need for a wife, easily replaced if she failed to appear? And what about this week stretching ahead of her, living in close quarters with a cowboy who unsettled her in ways she did not fully understand, and a housekeeper who saw far too much with those sharp eyes? "This town has me," Dalton had said, and Olivia wondered what it would feel like to belong so completely to a place that you could say such a thing with absolute certainty. She had never belonged anywhere, not really. Boston had been where she lived, but it had never felt like home. Especially not after her mother died, and her father descended into the gambling that destroyed them. This ranch, this wild country, was as foreign to her as the moon, and yet something about it called to a part of herself she had not known existed. Eventually, exhaustion won over anxiety, and she drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of endless horizons and green eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The next morning came brutally early when Sarah knocked on her door in the pre-dawn darkness. Olivia dragged herself from bed, disoriented and aching from the previous day's journey. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, though even that felt absurdly formal for ranch work. When she made her way downstairs, she found the kitchen already warm and bright with lamplight, and Sarah moving efficiently between the stove and the table. "There is coffee," Sarah said, nodding toward the pot. "Strong enough to strip paint, the way Dalton likes it. Help yourself. Then come over here, and I will show you how to make biscuits the way they need to be made." The coffee was indeed strong, bitter, and hot enough to scald her tongue, but it cleared the fog from Olivia's mind with impressive speed. She watched carefully as Sarah demonstrated the proper technique for mixing and kneading biscuit dough, then tried her own hand at it under the older woman's critical eye. "Not bad for a city girl," Sarah said eventually, which Olivia took as high praise given the source. "You have good hands, quick and neat. That will serve you well out here." When Dalton came in from the barn just as the sun was rising, Olivia felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the physical labor. He looked different in the morning light, his face showing the weariness of a man who had already been working for an hour, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air. He washed at the basin by the door, then took his place at the table with a nod of greeting to both women. Breakfast was hearty and filling, eggs and bacon and the biscuits Olivia had helped make, along with gravy and more of that black coffee. They ate in relative silence, the comfortable quiet of people focused on the necessary fuel for the day ahead. Olivia found herself studying Dalton when he was not looking, noticing the way his hands moved with precise economy, the way his eyes constantly checked the windows as if monitoring the weather or watching for something. He was a man perpetually aware of his surroundings, she realized, someone who had learned to notice details that meant the difference between safety and danger. After breakfast, Sarah set Olivia to work washing dishes and then moved her to mending, presenting a basket overflowing with shirts and pants that needed buttons replaced or seams repaired. Olivia settled into the work gratefully, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Her mother had insisted she learn proper needlework, and for once those ladylike accomplishments proved useful in unexpected ways. Through the window she could see Dalton working with a young horse in one of the corrals, his movements patient and steady as the animal circled him on a long rope. She found herself watching more than she should have, fascinated by the gentle authority he displayed. The horse, clearly green and nervous, gradually began to respond to his signals, its ears flickering forward with interest rather than fear. There was something beautiful in the wordless communication between man and animal, a trust being built with time and consistency rather than force. "He is good with them," Sarah said, coming to stand beside Olivia at the window. "Has a gift for it, really. Can gentle the wildest mustang given time and patience. Wish he was that patient with himself, but that is another matter." "What do you mean?" Olivia asked, curious despite knowing she probably should not pry. Sarah was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to say. "Dalton sets high standards for himself, too high sometimes. Blames himself when things go wrong, even when they are outside his control. His father died 5 years ago. Heart just gave out one day while they were working cattle. Dalton was 22 and suddenly he had this whole ranch to run by himself. Did not give himself time to grieve proper, just threw himself into the work. His mother had already passed when he was just a boy, and his older brother was killed in the war back in '63. So Dalton is the last of the Jenkins family, and I think he feels the weight of that." The picture Sarah painted made Olivia's chest ache with sympathy. She understood loss and responsibility, understood the way grief could drive you to keep moving because stopping meant feeling things too painful to face. Dalton carried his own scars, hidden beneath the quiet competence and the steady green eyes. The days fell into a pattern as the week progressed. Olivia rose early, helped with breakfast and household chores, mended and sewed, and learned the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch house running. Sarah proved to be an exacting but fair teacher, quick to correct mistakes but also generous with praise when it was earned. In the afternoons, Olivia sometimes walked the property, exploring the land within sight of the house, breathing in the clean air and marveling at the vastness of the sky. Dalton remained polite but somewhat distant, always working, always busy with the endless demands of the ranch. But in the evenings after supper, when Sarah retired early to her own small room off the kitchen, Olivia and Dalton found themselves talking. It started casually, comments about the weather or the day's work, but gradually deepened into real conversations that revealed the people beneath the roles they played. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the hard lessons his father had taught him about working the land and respecting the animals. He spoke of his brief time in Denver and why he had returned, of his conviction that a man needed to know his place in the world and commit to it rather than always chasing something else. She told him about Boston, carefully at first, but gradually with more honesty. She spoke of her mother's kindness and early death, of her father's slow disintegration into gambling and debt, of the suffocating expectations of society that valued women for their marriageability rather than their minds or hearts. She told him about the creditor who had cornered her at a party 3 months before, who had made it abundantly clear what he expected in exchange for forgiving her father's debts, and how she had realized she had to escape or be trapped in a situation that would destroy whatever remained of her soul. "I was a coward," she said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I ran away rather than face the situation." "That is not cowardice," Dalton said firmly. "That is survival. And it took courage to come out here alone, to trust a stranger's advertisement and risk everything on the possibility of a better life. Maybe it did not work out the way you planned, but you still made the choice to try. That counts for something. His words eased a knot of shame she had been carrying since leaving Boston. She looked at him in the starlight, seeing the strong lines of his profile, the way he held himself with unconscious grace even while sitting still. And she realized with a flutter of panic that she was beginning to care about his opinion far more than was wise for a woman who was supposedly preparing to marry another man. On the 5th day of her stay, disaster struck in the form of a broken fence and a scattered herd of cattle. Dalton discovered the problem at dawn and came back to the house with urgency written across his face. "Sarah, I need to ride out and round up those steers before they get too far scattered. Could take most of the day. Will you be all right managing things here?" But Sarah had been fighting a head cold for 2 days, and that morning it had settled in her chest, leaving her wheezing and feverish. She tried to insist she was fine, but even Olivia could see she needed to rest, not work. "Take Miss Bradford with you," Sarah said, then held up a hand to forestall their protests. "She knows how to ride. I heard her mention it. And you cannot handle that many head by yourself, Dalton, not if they have scattered like you think. She can at least help push them in the right direction, and she's smart enough to follow instructions. Go on, both of you. I will be fine here by myself for one day." Dalton looked at Olivia, clearly uncertain. "Do you ride?" "I do," Olivia confirmed, though she did not add that her riding experience consisted primarily of sedate walks through Boston parks on a well-mannered mare. "I am willing to help if you need me." 20 minutes later, she found herself mounted on a gentle gelding named Sam, wearing a split riding skirt that Sarah had produced from somewhere and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun. Dalton sat astride his own horse, a rangy buckskin with intelligent eyes, and looked at her with an expression that mixed doubt with resignation. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they set out. "If you get separated, head back to the ranch. Do not try to chase cattle on your own. They are not aggressive generally, but a spooked steer can hurt you without meaning to." The morning that followed was unlike anything Olivia had ever experienced. They rode across country that seemed empty at first glance, but revealed hidden gullies, rocky outcroppings, and stands of scrubby trees as they covered ground. Dalton pointed out the scattered cattle, small dark shapes against the pale earth, and explained how they would circle around and push them back toward the ranch in manageable groups. The work was hard and hot despite the autumn season. Olivia's horse, bless his patient heart, seemed to understand the job better than she did, responding to her uncertain guidance with tolerance. She learned quickly that cattle had personalities and opinions, that some could be moved with gentle pressure while others required more assertive handling. Her arms ached from controlling the horse, her legs screamed from the unfamiliar posture, and sweat soaked through her clothes until she looked as dusty and bedraggled as any ranch hand. But there was also a wild joy in it, a sense of accomplishment, as she helped Dalton gather the scattered animals and push them toward home. When a particularly stubborn steer tried to break away from the group, she found herself reacting on instinct, urging Sam forward to cut off the escape route. The maneuver worked, sending the steer back toward the main group, and when she looked over at Dalton, she saw surprise and approval on his face. "Well done," he called across the distance. "You are a natural." The praise warmed her more than it should have, made her sit a little straighter in the saddle despite her exhaustion. They worked together through the afternoon, developing an unspoken coordination that felt almost like a dance, each anticipating the other's movements. By the time they drove the last of the cattle through the repaired fence gap, the sun was lowering toward the western mountains, and Olivia was certain she would never be able to move again. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, both too tired for conversation. But when they reached the barn and Dalton helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Olivia felt something shift between them. She looked up into his face, seeing past the dust and weariness to the man beneath, and found him looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I could not have done that without you today. You worked harder than most men I have hired over the years." "I wanted to help," she replied, aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his body and the way her pulse raced. "I wanted to be useful, not just a burden you took on out of charity." "You were never a burden," Dalton said, and there was something in his voice that made the words mean more than they should have. "From the first moment I saw you standing lost on that street, I have not thought of you as a burden." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger. Olivia knew she should step back, should remember Charles Whitmore and her obligations and all the reasons why this was inappropriate. But she found herself frozen, unable to look away from Dalton's eyes, wanting nothing more than to close the small distance between them and discover what his kiss would taste like. It was Dalton who broke the spell, stepping back with visible effort and turning to tend to the horses. "We should get cleaned up," he said, his voice rough. "Sarah will be wondering where we are, and she will want a full report on the cattle." That night, Olivia lay in her narrow bed and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. In 2 days, she would take the stage to Milford and send her telegram to Charles Whitmore. She would explain what had happened and make arrangements to travel to Silver Creek, where she would meet the man she had agreed to marry. It was the plan, the obligation, the right thing to do. But her heart, traitorous and foolish, wanted something entirely different. Her heart wanted to stay on this ranch with its wide skies and endless horizons. Her heart wanted more evenings talking with Dalton on the porch, more days working side by side, more of those rare smiles that transformed his serious face into something breathtaking. Her heart wanted a life she had no right to imagine. Not when she was promised to another man, not when Dalton had given no clear indication that he wanted her to stay beyond the charity of a temporary arrangement. The next day brought attention to the ranch that had not existed before. Dalton was quieter than usual, throwing himself into his work with an intensity that Sarah noticed and commented on. Olivia moved through her chores mechanically, her mind spinning with impossible scenarios. What if she simply did not go to Silver Creek? What if she asked to stay here permanently, offering to work as Sarah's assistant or some such arrangement? But pride and uncertainty held her tongue. She could not presume to know Dalton's feelings, and she would not throw herself at a man who might simply see her as a responsibility he had temporarily assumed. That evening, as they gathered for supper, Sarah looked between them with her sharp eyes and shook her head. "You two are about as much fun as a funeral. What happened out there with the cattle yesterday?" "Nothing happened," Dalton said too quickly. "We worked. We brought them home, that is all." "Nothing happened," Olivia echoed, staring at her plate. Sarah made a disgusted sound. "You are both terrible liars, but I am too old and too tired to drag it out of you. Olivia, tomorrow is Saturday. The stage to Milford leaves Sunday morning from Beaver. Have you thought about what you want to say in that telegram?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Olivia looked up and found both Sarah and Dalton watching her, waiting for her answer. She realized with sudden clarity that her decision would affect more than just her own future. It would impact everyone at this table, everyone who had welcomed her into their lives when she had nowhere else to go. "I have thought about it," she said slowly, "and I find myself uncertain. A week ago, my path seemed clear. I would go to Silver Creek, meet Charles Whitmore, marry him as agreed. It was a practical arrangement, a solution to both our problems, but now I wonder if practical is enough. I wonder if binding myself for life to a stranger based on letters that may not have been entirely truthful is truly the best choice I can make." "Then do not do it," Dalton said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to control. "Stay here. We can find you a position in town if living on the ranch is not proper. Mrs. Henderson needs help with her boarding house, even if she is particular. Or the Reverend's wife was just saying she needed assistance with teaching, and you are obviously educated. There are options, Olivia." The use of her first name, the raw honesty in his voice, made her eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. "You would help me even though you barely know me. You would vouch for me in your community, risk your reputation for a woman who showed up by accident?" "It was not an accident," Sarah said quietly, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I have lived long enough to stop believing in pure chance. You were meant to get off that stage in Beaver, Olivia Bradford, and Dalton is a fool if he does not tell you the real reason he wants you to stay." Dalton shot Sarah a look that would have quelled a lesser woman, but she simply returned it with a raised eyebrow of challenge. He turned to Olivia, and she saw him wrestling with something internal, some battle between caution and desire. "Since we are laying cards on the table," he said finally, I will be honest. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that first day. I told myself it was just concern for your situation, basic human decency. But when we were out with the cattle yesterday, when I saw you work so hard and adapt so quick, when I saw you smile despite being exhausted and sore, I realized I was lying to myself. I do not want you to go to Silver Creek. I do not want you to marry Charles Whitmore or any other man. I want you to stay here with me." The room seemed to have lost all its air. Olivia stared at Dalton, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they could both hear it. "You want me to stay?" she repeated, needing to hear him confirm it. "I want you to stay," he said firmly. "Not as a housekeeper or a charity case. I want you to stay as my wife, if you will have me. I know it is sudden, and I know I do not have the education or refinement of your banker. I'm just a cowboy with a small ranch and more work than hours in the day. But I can promise you honesty and respect and a life where you will never have to be afraid of creditors or unwanted advances. And I can promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to earn the gift of your presence." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks before she could stop them. Years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope finally finding release. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Dalton said, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. He took her hands in his, and she felt the calluses, the strength, the steady warmth of him. "I know you are brave and adaptable. I know you work hard and do not complain. I know you see beauty in this harsh land. I know that when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a long winter. And I know that this town has me, but I would leave it all behind if that is what you needed. For you, Olivia, I would find a way to let go. This town has me, but for you, I would leave." The magnitude of that offer, the sacrifice he was willing to make, broke through the last of Olivia's resistance. This man who was rooted in this place, who had said his family was buried here, who had come back from Denver because he belonged here, was willing to walk away from it all for her. "I would never ask that of you," she said through her tears. "This place is part of who you are. But Dalton, I need you to understand what you are offering. I come with nothing. No dowry, no money, nothing but the belongings in my trunk, and a lot of memories I'm trying to leave behind. I am not the refined Lady Charles Whitmore thought he was getting. I am just a woman who ran away from her problems and ended up in the wrong town by mistake." "The right town," Dalton corrected gently, "and you are wrong about coming with nothing. You come with yourself, and that is everything I want. So I will ask you plain, Olivia Bradford, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who has loved you since the moment you stood on that dusty street looking lost and proud and beautiful all at once?" Olivia looked into his green eyes and saw her future written there, clear and simple and terrifying in its possibility. She could go to Silver Creek and marry a man she did not know based on pretty lies. Or she could stay here with a man who had shown her kindness and honesty, who worked hard and loved deeply, who offered her a life that would be challenging but real. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you, Dalton Jenkins. I will stay and build a life with you. This town has you, and I want it to have me too." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her with a careful strength that made her feel both safe and cherished. She buried her face against his shoulder and let herself cry, releasing all the fear and uncertainty of the past months. His hand stroked her hair, and she heard him murmur soft words of comfort and promise. From across the room, Sarah sniffed loudly. "Well, it is about time you two figured it out. I was beginning to think I would have to lock you in a room together until you admitted your feelings. Now we have a wedding to plan, and you have a telegram to send, though it will be a very different message than the one you thought you would be writing." The next morning, Dalton drove Olivia into Beaver in the wagon, both of them dressed in their best clothes despite the dusty journey. They stopped first at the general store, where Tucker provided the materials for the telegram that would be sent on to Charles Whitmore in Silver Creek. Olivia wrote carefully, choosing her words with care. "Mr. Whitmore, due to unforeseen circumstances, I am unable to fulfill our agreement. I was delivered to the wrong town and have made other arrangements for my future. I apologize for any inconvenience and wish you well in finding a suitable wife. Sincerely, Olivia Bradford." It was brief and formal, but it said what needed to be said. She felt a twinge of guilt for the disappointment it would cause, but Sarah's words echoed in her mind. She had no obligation to tie herself to false promises and an uncertain situation. Charles Whitmore would recover and find another bride, and she would build a life with a man who had proven his character through actions rather than letters. Next, they walked to the small church at the end of Beaver's main street. Reverend Mills was a kindly man in his 50s who listened to their story with interest and something that looked like satisfaction. "I wondered when you would find someone, Dalton," he said with a smile. "You have been alone too long, and, Miss Bradford, you are welcome to our community. We are small, but we take care of our own. Now, when would you like to hold the wedding?" "As soon as possible," Dalton said, glancing at Olivia for confirmation. "No reason to wait unless you want a big ceremony?" Olivia shook her head. "I have no family to invite, no one who needs to be present. A simple ceremony with witnesses would be perfect." They settled on the following Saturday, giving them a week to make basic preparations and allowing Reverend Mills to publish the banns as was proper. Sarah would stand as witness, along with the storekeeper Tucker, who seemed genuinely pleased by the whole development. As they left the church, Olivia noticed the curious stares of the townspeople, the whispered conversations that followed their progress down the street. She lifted her chin and walked proudly at Dalton's side, refusing to show shame or uncertainty. This was her choice, freely made, and she would not apologize for it. "They are going to talk," Dalton said quietly as they climbed back into the wagon. "Small town, big news. Are you prepared for that?" "Let them talk," Olivia replied with a confidence she was growing into. "I have survived Boston society gossip, which can be vicious beyond measure. I think I can handle the curiosity of Beaver, Utah." His answering smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something that made her heart stutter. "I am beginning to think I am the lucky one in this arrangement." The week before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Sarah helped Olivia alter one of her nicer dresses into something suitable for the ceremony, a deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. They cleaned the entire house from top to bottom, not because it needed it, but because Sarah claimed it was tradition to start a marriage in a spotless home. Dalton worked on repairs and improvements to the house that he had been putting off, including fixing a leak in the roof of what would become their shared bedroom. That particular detail made Olivia's stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. She was educated enough to know what happened between husband and wife, but knowing in theory was vastly different from facing the reality of sharing a bed with a man she had known barely 2 weeks. When Sarah caught her staring anxiously at the bedroom door one afternoon, the older woman pulled her aside for a frank conversation. "You are worried about the wedding night," Sarah said, not making it a question. "That is natural enough. But let me tell you something about Dalton Jenkins. He is the most patient, gentle man I have ever known, except when it comes to himself. He will be careful with you, Olivia. He will not rush you or push you beyond what you are ready for. Trust him and trust yourself." The words helped ease some of Olivia's anxiety, though the butterflies remained. She found herself watching Dalton with new awareness, noticing the strength in his hands, the way he moved with unconscious grace, the rare smiles that seemed to come more frequently now. Once she caught him watching her with an intensity that made heat rise in her cheeks, and the desire she saw in his eyes both thrilled and terrified her. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and clear with a sky so blue it seemed painted. Olivia dressed with Sarah's help, pinning her dark hair in an elaborate style that would have been appropriate for a Boston ballroom. Sarah produced a simple veil of lace that had belonged to Dalton's mother, a gesture that made Olivia's eyes fill with grateful tears. "She would have liked you," Sarah said gruffly. She always wanted Dalton to find someone with spirit, someone who would not let him get too serious and withdrawn. "You are exactly what he needs, girl." The ceremony at the small church was simple, but moving. Dalton stood at the altar in a new shirt and his best pants, his hair neatly combed, looking so handsome that Olivia nearly stumbled as she walked down the aisle on Tucker's offered arm. His eyes never left her face, and she saw wonder there, and desire, and something deeper that might have been love or the beginning of it. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to honor and cherish, to stand together through whatever challenges life might bring. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton lifted the veil with hands that trembled slightly and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and a warmth to her chest that spread through her entire body. The small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness the wedding clapped and offered their congratulations. Mrs. Henderson, the particular widow who ran the boarding house, actually smiled and told Olivia that she was welcome to join the ladies' quilting circle. Several ranchers shook Dalton's hand with genuine warmth, one of them joking that it was about time he settled down and started a family. Back at the ranch, Sarah had prepared a wedding feast that was impressive by any standard. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and a cake she had somehow managed to bake without Olivia noticing. They ate and talked, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Olivia felt truly at home, surrounded by people who cared about her not for what she represented but for who she actually was. As evening fell, Sarah pointedly announced she was going to stay overnight with her sister in town, giving the newlyweds privacy. She hugged Olivia tightly and whispered, "Be happy, girl. You deserve it." And then they were alone, the ranch quiet around them, the house empty except for the two of them. Olivia felt nervousness return as Dalton banked the fire and checked the locks with the habitual caution of someone who had lived alone for too long. When he finally turned to her, she saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "We do not have to rush anything," he said quietly. "I meant what I said in those vows, Olivia. I will honor and cherish you, which means respecting your comfort and your readiness." The kindness of that statement, the clear care behind it, gave Olivia the courage she needed. She crossed the room to him and took his hands, looking up into his face. "I am nervous," she admitted, "but I'm also your wife, and I want this marriage to be real in every way. I trust you, Dalton. Show me what it means to belong to someone who truly cares." His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but as she responded, pressing closer to him, it deepened into something more passionate. He lifted her in his arms and carried her upstairs to the bedroom they would now share, laying her on the bed with a reverence that made her feel precious beyond measure. What followed was tender and sometimes awkward. Two people learning each other's bodies and responses, but there was laughter too and whispered words of encouragement and desire. When it was over, Olivia lay in Dalton's arms feeling fundamentally changed. She had given herself to this man in the most intimate way possible, and rather than feeling diminished or possessed, she felt expanded, completed. His hand stroked her hair lazily, and she felt his chest rise and fall with his breathing, steady and reassuring. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I did not plan to, and I certainly did not expect it to happen so fast. But I do, Olivia. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered back, and realized it was true. Somewhere between the moment he had offered help on that dusty street, and now she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with this quiet cowboy who saw her for who she truly was. "Thank you for taking a chance on a mail-order bride in the wrong town." She felt him smile against her hair. "Best mistake that stage driver ever made." The months that followed were among the happiest of Olivia's life, though they were not without challenges. The work of a ranch was endless and often exhausting. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove, to preserve food for the winter, to sew and mend until her fingers ached. She learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds, to understand the rhythms of the animals, to appreciate the stark beauty of the landscape in all its seasonal changes. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high against the buildings and temperatures that dropped so low that water froze in minutes. She and Dalton worked side by side to keep the animals fed and safe, breaking ice in troughs, spreading hay, ensuring that nothing suffered from neglect. On the coldest nights, they huddled together under piles of quilts, and he told her stories of growing up on the ranch, of his parents and brother, of the life that had shaped him into the man he had become. Spring brought the chaos of calving season and the joy of watching new life burst forth across the land. Olivia learned to help with difficult births, to care for orphaned calves, to appreciate the fierce satisfaction that came from helping creatures survive against the odds. The ranch began to feel truly like hers as much as Dalton's, a place she tended with care and pride. Summer meant long days of hard work in the fields, putting up hay and making repairs, but it also brought warm evenings on the porch and the spectacular sunsets that never ceased to take her breath away. Sarah, recovered from her cold, became more friend than housekeeper, a beloved presence who offered wisdom and tart commentary in equal measure. It was in early autumn, nearly a year after that fateful day when the stage had dropped her in Beaver, that Olivia realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable once she recognized them, and she felt a mixture of joy and terror at the knowledge. She was going to be a mother, going to bring a new life into this wild country, and the responsibility of it felt enormous. She told Dalton one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge. He had been talking about his plans for the ranch the following year, his dreams for expansion and improvement, when she interrupted him. "We are going to need to make changes to the house," she said carefully. "We will need a nursery, a crib, all the things a baby requires." The silence that followed was profound. Dalton turned to look at her, his eyes wide with wonder and dawning realization. "A baby? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but yes, I am quite sure. You are going to be a father, Dalton." He pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried against her neck. She felt wetness on her skin and realized he was crying. This strong, stoic man undone by the news that he would have a family. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but shining with happiness. "I did not think I would ever have this," he said roughly. "A wife who loved me, a child on the way, a real family. I thought I would grow old alone on this ranch, and I had made my peace with that. But you, Olivia, you changed everything. You made me believe in miracles again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Olivia found the physical demands exhausting combined with the work of the ranch. Sarah fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, avoid heavy lifting. Dalton became almost comically overprotective, rushing to help her with every small task until she finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I need to keep working," she told him firmly. "I need to feel useful and capable. Yes, I will be careful, and yes, I will ask for help when I need it. But do not treat me like an invalid. I am strong, and our child will be strong because of it." He grudgingly agreed, though she caught him watching her with anxious eyes whenever she did anything more strenuous than stirring a pot. His concern was endearing even when it was frustrating, a reminder of how much she had come to mean to him. The baby arrived in late May during a spectacular thunderstorm that rattled the windows and turned the ranch yard into a sea of mud. The midwife from town had been staying with them for 3 days waiting for labor to begin, and when it finally did, Olivia understood why women approach childbirth with such trepidation. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced, waves of it, that stole her breath and made her cry out despite her best efforts to remain stoic. Dalton stayed with her through it all, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. Sarah and the midwife worked with calm efficiency, and after what felt like an eternity but was actually only 12 hours, Olivia heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "A son," the midwife announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Olivia's chest. A healthy, strong boy with a good set of lungs on him. Olivia looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and overwhelming love. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, flailing fists that seemed to demand the world's attention. When she looked up at Dalton, she saw her own wonder reflected on his face as he gazed at their child with awe. "He is beautiful," Dalton whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger. The baby's fist closed around it reflexively, and Dalton made a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is so small." "He will grow," Olivia said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Dalton said thoughtfully, "What about Matthew? It was my father's name, Matthew James Jenkins." "Matthew," Olivia repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like that. Matthew James Jenkins, welcome to the world." The weeks following Matthew's birth were a blur of exhaustion and joy. The baby proved to have healthy lungs and strong opinions, waking every few hours to nurse and making his displeasure known when his needs were not immediately met. Olivia moved through the days in a fog of sleeplessness, marveling at the fierce love she felt for this tiny creature who depended on her completely. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, taking over household tasks so Olivia could rest, pacing the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, sitting for hours simply watching his son sleep with an expression of pure contentment. Sarah declared Matthew the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, and could often be found singing to him in her creaky voice, or knitting tiny garments with surprising speed. As summer turned to autumn again, completing the cycle of a full year, Olivia took stock of her life with amazement. 2 years ago, she had been trapped in Boston with no prospects and no hope. 1 year ago, she had arrived in Beaver by mistake, terrified and alone. Now she stood on the porch of her home, her husband at her side, and their son sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt a sense of belonging so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. "I am thinking about mistakes," Olivia said softly, "about how sometimes the wrong turn leads you to exactly where you need to be. That stage driver dropping me in Beaver instead of Silver Creek seemed like a disaster at the time, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought me here, to you, to this life." "This town has me," Dalton said, echoing the words he had spoken that first day. "But you, Olivia, you have my heart. You and Matthew both. I would not trade this life for anything in the world." She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Neither would I. I have everything I ever wanted, even though I did not know I wanted it. A home, a family, a place where I belong. And love, Dalton. So much love." He tilted her face up and kissed her gently, mindful of the sleeping baby between them. "I love you, Olivia Jenkins. Thank you for getting on the wrong stage." She laughed softly, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "I love you too. And you are welcome. Best mistake I ever made." The years that followed brought their share of challenges and triumphs. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts, growing slowly but steadily. 2 years after Matthew's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named for the woman who had helped them both so much. Sarah Potter wept openly when they told her, declaring it the greatest honor of her life. 3 years after that, another son arrived, Thomas Daniel, completing their family. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able, running across the open land with the confidence of those who knew they belonged. Matthew proved to have his father's patience with animals and his mother's quick mind. Sarah Elizabeth was fierce and independent, fearless in ways that simultaneously terrified and delighted her parents. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, content to spend hours watching the world with observant eyes. Dalton's predictions about the ranch proved accurate. With hard work and careful management, they expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available. They became known throughout the territory for quality horses and cattle, and their reputation brought buyers from as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City. The prosperity allowed them to make improvements to the house, adding rooms for the growing family and modernizing where they could. But the true wealth of their life together was measured in moments rather than money. Evenings on the porch with the children playing in the yard. Christmas mornings with a house full of laughter and chaos. Summer picnics by the creek that ran through their property. The quiet intimacy of lying in bed together after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's presence. Sarah Potter remained with them until her death at 72, surrounded by the family she had helped create. Olivia mourned her deeply. This woman, who had taken in a strange mail-order bride without judgment and taught her how to thrive in this harsh country. They buried her in the Jenkins family cemetery on the hill, her grave marked with a stone that read, "Sarah Potter, beloved friend and grandmother of our hearts." As Olivia stood at that grave with Dalton's arm around her and their children gathered close, she thought about the chain of unlikely events that had brought her to this moment: a gambling father's debts, a desperate decision to answer a stranger's advertisement, a stage driver's mistake, or a twist of fate that delivered her to Beaver instead of Silver Creek. Dalton's kind offer of help when she was stranded and afraid. Sometimes she wondered what had happened to Charles Whitmore, whether he had found another mail-order bride, whether he was happy in Silver Creek. But those thoughts were fleeting, curiosities about a path not taken. She had no regrets about her choice, no doubt that she had ended up exactly where she was meant to be. Time moved on, as it always does. The children grew and eventually left to build their own lives. Matthew took over much of the ranch work as Dalton's hair turned gray and his joints grew stiff. Sarah Elizabeth married a rancher from the next county over, a good man who adored her fierce spirit. Thomas surprised everyone by going to university and becoming a teacher, though he returned to Beaver every summer to help with the ranch and reconnect with his roots. Through it all, Olivia and Dalton remained constants for each other, their love deepening with every passing year. They settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage, able to communicate with a glance, finishing each other's sentences, working together with the ease of long practice. The passion of their early days mellowed into something equally powerful but more steady, a foundation that held firm through every storm. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Olivia back to Beaver, to the spot where he had first seen her standing alone and lost on the dusty street. The town had grown some over the years, new buildings replacing old ones, but the essential character remained the same. "Do you remember?" he asked, holding her hand as they stood in the middle of the street. "Every detail," Olivia replied, squeezing his fingers. "I remember being terrified and trying not to show it. I remember you walking up with those steady green eyes and that serious face. I remember thinking you looked like you had been carved from stone." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. All that elegance and refinement completely out of place in our dusty little town, and I remember wanting to help you but not knowing if you would trust me." "I am glad I did," Olivia said softly. "Trust you, I mean. That choice changed my entire life." "Changed mine too," Dalton said. "This town has me, Olivia. It always will. But you have my soul. Every piece of me that matters, you have held safe for 25 years. And I love you more today than I did the day we married." She turned to face him fully. This man who had given her everything, who had loved her when she was lost and helped her become the woman she was meant to be. His face was lined now, weathered by years of sun and wind, but to her eyes, he was still the handsome cowboy who had offered kindness to a stranger. "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for offering help. Thank you for loving me enough to ask me to stay." He kissed her there in the middle of the street, not caring who might see, not caring that they were no longer young. It was a kiss that spoke of history and commitment, of passion tempered by time, of a love that had survived everything life threw at it and emerged stronger. As they walked back to their wagon hand in hand, Olivia thought about the younger version of herself who had stepped off that stage so full of fear and uncertainty. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened girl that everything would be all right, that the mistake was actually a blessing, that the wrong town would become the right home. But perhaps it was better this way, she reflected. Perhaps the journey, with all its anxiety and uncertainty, was what made the destination so sweet. She had earned this happiness through courage and hard work and a willingness to take a chance on an unexpected possibility. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, the buildings warm in the afternoon light, smoke rising from the chimney where Matthew's wife was probably starting dinner. Their grandchildren would be there, running and playing, filling the house with noise and laughter. It was a good life, a rich life, built on the foundation of that one fateful day when the mail order bride got dropped off in the wrong town and the cowboy said, "This town has me." Olivia smiled to herself, thinking about all the years ahead, whatever time they had left together. They would face it side by side as they had faced everything else. And when their time finally came, they would be buried together on that hill with the rest of the Jenkins family, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. "What are you smiling about?" Dalton asked, noticing her expression. "Everything," Olivia said simply. "Absolutely everything." And it was true. She had no complaints, no regrets, no wishes for a different life. She had been a mail-order bride delivered to the wrong town, and she had found a cowboy who had said, "This town has me." But in the end, they had both discovered something far more important. They had found each other, and that had made all the difference. The wrong turn had led her home, and she would spend the rest of her days grateful for every moment of this unexpected, wonderful life they had built together in the wide open spaces of the Wild West.